Okay, well, thanks folks for joining in for this Tech Talk with the GIS Trek. My name's Keith Weber. I'll actually be doing the presentation today and not just moderating presentations. And the topic I want to talk about today is mapping with smartphones. You know, years ago, we used to map everything with very dedicated GPS receivers. Sometimes years ago, we carried backpacks. That backpack was the GPS receiver, cords and stuff tangled up all over the place. And then handheld things that were about the size of a large brick. And now today we have these smartphones that are very, very capable little machines, and we use those to do our mapping. So we oftentimes wonder, at least I do, as we're looking at trying to gain good precision in our, at least in our horizontal positioning, X and Y coordinates for our GIS work, I oftentimes ask how accurate is in this particular method. So, you know, each spring, I typically teach a field data collection workshop here at the GIS Center in Pocatello at Idaho State University. And the most recent workshop that I taught, obviously, was in the spring of 2022. And I offer it in the spring because that's when a lot of folks gear up for their summer field season. Grad students get ready to go out to the field and so on. And this year, once again, I taught with ArcGIS Field Maps app. You know, in the past, I used ArcGIS Collector. And so for a number of years, we have been using some smartphones to do our mapping. In 2022, it was kind of fun because we had, number one, very good turnout. Lots of students were participating in that workshop, and we had people, I think, one person in the Salt Lake area, a number of students connected up from Boise, and then the rest were here in Pocatello. This was a hands-on workshop, and the outdoor data collection exercise recorded 150 point observations. We used, or the students used, a variety of Android and iOS smartphones, and we all used the most current version of the Field Maps app, which is free and available, obviously, for both Android and iOS. Prior to collection and part of the exercise during the morning part of that workshop, we ran a tool, a geoprocessing tool called Add GPS Metadata Fields. And that is a tool available to you in ArcGIS Pro. And really, it's kind of misnamed. It should be Add GNSS Metadata Fields. Because it, of course, is going to be gathering information or data from not just the United States GPS constellation, but GLONASS and Galileo and Beidou and so on and so forth, the entire GNSS constellation. Now, this little tool, when it finishes, adds nearly 24 new fields or attributes to, in this case, our point feature class. Those fields are automatically populated during field data collection. The user doesn't need to do anything to those fields. In fact, the 24 fields are hidden so that they don't kind of confuse the user. They don't need to see it. They're not going to be entering data. It is all systematically generated data. If you'd like to learn more about that Add GPS Metadata Fields tool, there is a link, and you'll be able to get to that. I'll make sure that that link goes live on the YouTube video so a person can get to that as well. We'll put that into the description. So we analyzed, or I analyzed, the precision of those points after collection. Remember, all the students in total collected 150 points. This is a zoom in to some of those points that were collected near the ISU campus in Pocatello. And you can see there, my note is that the Android observations are shown in red, iOS shown in black. And the way that I downloaded that data was I went to that geodatabase, or that feature layer, hosted feature layer in ArcGIS Online. I clicked on the export button. It then exported all of those data into a file geodatabase that I had chosen, including all the photos that were taken. So these downloads can become kind of large. And then I downloaded that zip file containing the geodatabase to my computer. And then I did my big three: map it, graph it, and run descriptive statistics. So these data first, the GNSS data that were collected by field maps, the data were reviewed and visualized in ArcGIS Pro, and this is a portion of that table showing, just 4 of those additional GPS metadata fields. And the one I was really interested in is this average horizontal accuracy, and it's given in meters. In the averaging, you can see most people were using between 5 and 10 observations as part of their average. So that's pretty good. It's certainly better than using a single point observation. I think our average horizontal accuracy would have jumped up quite a bit if we had used only one observation for each of the submitted points. And years ago, we always used to recommend or suggest using 30 averaged positions. That's still very, very good practice when you're collecting data. I'll call it for real in the field, something that you're going to keep and continue to use in a workshop situation. Using 5 or 10 positions, averaged positions, works out pretty darn well in this case, at least. I ran the descriptive statistics. That's just the summary statistics tool. I took the signs for all receivers. That was the name of the feature class. We were collecting street signs as part of that exercise. And what I wanted to see, of course, was the horizontal accuracy, the mean horizontal accuracy. You can see this, the median horizontal accuracy, and then the standard deviation of that horizontal accuracy. And those records, 150 records, were subset or summarized by the receiver name. Receiver name simply, it was described as iOS, Samsung Android, Motorola Android, et cetera, et cetera. By the way, we also had a few points, 4 actually, that were collected using the RTN. And the RTN that we use here in Southeast Idaho is the Utah Reference Network, called TURN. And those connections were made with that particular smartphone. It was an Android smartphone paired to a Trimble R1 receiver using 4G LTE. I don't know if that connection made much of a difference, if we would see something different with a 5G, but I would just give that information here, kind of an FYI for you. Okay, let's take a look at the results of this summary statistics. The very first line here shows us the results from the Trimble R1 using the TURN real-time network. There was the 4 observations made, and this is real interesting. The mean horizontal accuracy was 0.62. Median was exactly the same, 0.62. So that's very good. It tells us, and of course there's only 4 points, but it tells us that those 4 observations follow what we call a normal distribution statistically. And the standard deviation was down to just 1/10, slightly over 1/10 of a meter. Then when we look at the iOS, we had 75 observations there. Mean horizontal accuracy, a little over 5¼ meters. Median, just about 5. So it tells us a little bit about that. Not really perfectly normal distribution, and almost a full meter in standard deviation. That is a lot of variability. The two Android systems, interestingly enough, the Motorola Android did a better job, slightly better job than the Samsung Android. But in total, we're pretty much looking at almost 75 points being used there as well. About 3 meters accuracy. You can see that pretty much exactly the same mean and median, and a nice, very low standard deviation. Samsung, just about the same, 3.1, 3.3 on a 0.3 or a third of a meter standard deviation. There's our total sample size accounting for all 150 observations. Now, finally, let's graph it. Let's take a look at this. In the blue bar, you're looking at mean horizontal accuracy. The orange bar, this is our median, and then the gray bar is your standard deviation. And just now I noticed that I guess I accidentally put on the Bronco colors instead of the orange and black, but oh well, we won't tell anyone. It's just how it turned out. But kind of interesting results here, just allowing us very quickly to visualize the data we looked at a moment ago in the tabular results. Take-home message. First, note the tremendous improvement made by simply using the RTN, the real-time network. We are down all the time to sub-meter with a smartphone that has a Bluetooth connection to that very, very small Trimble R1 unit. And those units are a couple $1,000s. The subscription, I believe, for Turn is a couple $100 for a year. But where precision is important and you need to be better than 1 meter, if you need to be sub-meter in your horizontal positioning, then I would say that is a very good investment. We have a couple of those Trimble R1s that I've purchased here at the GIS Center. We use those throughout all of our summer field seasons, and I think it's a great investment. Second, look at how Android smartphones seem to have provided quite a bit better precision than the iOS smartphones. But now we need to ask, are they statistically different? Oh, yes, they look like they're different, but are they statistically different? There is, by the way, a sufficient sample size. Our magic number of 30 that we always like to see as a minimum number of samples or observations when we're doing statistical work has been satisfied. We have pretty much 75 observations for each the iOS and the Android smartphones, but there is some variability, that standard deviation. So we can't really just say, yep, those bars were a little bit lower for Android, so it must be better. No, we should do a more rigorous statistical analysis. So that's what I have done. I used ANOVA, which is called analysis of variance, and I used a single factor ANOVA because the only thing that was changing was the type of smartphone that was being used. In total, we had 71 observations with the Android, 75 with iOS. So very, very similar number of observations. We do not have a disproportionate sample size between our groups. That's a very good thing to have statistically. And then the thing we want to look at here is this p-value. And it's telling us that between these groups, Android versus iOS, that this is a highly significant difference between those two observations, which is the observation of horizontal accuracy. So statistically, the Android smartphones did perform better than the iOS smartphones. But there is always uncertainty. First of all data were collected on one day, one afternoon. So that's good for consistency in an experiment. If we thought of this as an experimental design, that's really good. However, maybe if the conditions were different, it's possible that iOS would have done slightly better under different ambient conditions, different atmospheric conditions. I'm not sure of that, and I'm not sure how much of an effect that would have. we didn't test for that. I will also note that all of the observations made in the Boise area were done by iOS only. In Pocatello, we had a good sampling of iOS and Android, and but I will note that the Boise was only done in iOS. Okay, that brings me to the end of this presentation. A quick 15-minute tech talk for you. I'll open things up for any questions. I see one in the chat line, and also feel free to unmute yourself if you'd just like to ask that question using your mic.